question to the panel is the same one that I'm getting. How is any of this constitutional? I don't know who wants to kick things off here, but I think that's the big question of the day.
I'm happy to take the first swing, and then everyone else can correct me. You know, the first question one gets when they ask what is constitutional, the question is, well, what part of the Constitution and which Constitution are we talking about? The federal Constitution that we have gives the federal government enumerated powers, limited powers, and it reserves through the 10th Amendment to the states all powers that are not expressly conveyed to the federal government. And the general rule when it comes to public health, public safety measures is that those are primarily the state's powers. The federal government doesn't have a primary police power, as we refer to it, but a general power to regulate in the name of safety or health or welfare. That's generally a state power. Now, there are individual constitutional provisions that may come into play from time to time. The federal government obviously is charged with issues surrounding quarantine, particularly with respect to immigration from foreign countries and travel between the United States and foreign countries. The First Amendment can impose some limits on government action, even in times of emergency. And there are maybe a couple other provisions here, there possibly the Privileges and Immunities Clause of the 14th Amendment that may have something to say about state action. But that's going to be far and few in between. For the most part, you're going to have to look to state government and state laws to determine whether or not emergency powers or emergency declarations push constitutional boundaries. And as we may have learned, or some of us may have learned for the first time in this process, Maine's legislature and Maine's statutory scheme actually gives a fair amount of power to the governor to declare emergencies and to assume emergency power, which include, and I'm not making this up, it's right there in the statute, to suspend laws and rules as necessary to meet the threat. I think that there's some consideration, probably properly so, that maybe needs to be changed. It's probably not going to be changed anytime in the middle of what we're enduring right now. But we start from the process that this is a decision largely for the states to make, and Maine at some point in time has made the decision to give the governor a fair amount of power in this area. That is not to say that the power can be exercised arbitrarily, and we can talk about ways or specific scenarios to challenge this. But you know, the first question is this constitutional? The answer is going to be mostly yes, and it's going to be very difficult to convince a judge, state or federal, to challenge directly the authority that has been given to the governor by the people of Maine through their legislature. So that's a very high-level answer, and there's a lot of there's a lot of devil in the details that we can discuss further. But that's one way I think it's useful to start answering the question.
And I think Matt, that I tend to agree with Patrick that I think it's going to be very hard, at least where we are right now, against the background of the pandemic and historic police powers that have happened in the past, to come in and say that the stay-at-home order, which is probably the most concern of most people, is unduly burdensome and somewhat unconstitutional, particularly when, at least initially, I think the stay-at-home orders, not only by the governor of the state of Maine, but also elsewhere in the country, they're not meant to be a permanent state of affairs, but almost like a timeout period. You can tell I've had kids, but a timeout or a holding pattern to get various states ready for what is the next phase when it's safe to do so.